Mr. Azmun Ahmad.
Question 9, please.
Question what? Oh, sorry, Mr. Patrick Day.
Mr. Speaker, sir, China and the US are major economic partners to countries around the world, including Singapore. To date, the direct negative impact of the tariffs announced by the US and China on the Singapore economy is limited. Given the modest share that the affected products have as a percentage of Singapore's total domestic exports, MTI's analysis estimates the tariffs to directly impact about 0.09% of our domestic exports to the world. Nonetheless, we are closely monitoring developments, particularly for any longer-term indirect impact on companies and workers. Our economic agencies are in close contact with companies that may be affected. Singapore has also registered our concerns with the relevant US and Chinese departments and is continuing to engage them. Singapore is a strong proponent of free trade and supporter of the rules-based multilateral trading system. We remain concerned that an escalating cycle of expanding unilateral tariff measures will result in negative spillover effects on global supply chains. Any disruption to global trade flows or trade volumes will affect big and small economies alike. We hope that countries will exercise restraint and avoid further escalation of tensions.
Mr. Patrick Day.
I wish to thank the Minister for his reply. Recently, I spoke to one of a PME, professional manager executive, who works in the US MNC and situated in China. And she has expressed concerns over the uncertainties of what's happening. So they're watching that space closely. And it's not just the US tariffs. I think there are a few things that are happening. You're looking at potential review of the US interest rates. You're also looking at BEPS coming up. And of course, at the same time, in US, corporate tax has gone down as well. So there are quite a few measures which has caused a bit of uncertainty among workers, particularly so because in Singapore there are quite a number of us, of our PMEs and workers as well, working in US MNCs or even Chinese MNCs in Singapore as well as in their respective countries. So I urge government, especially the economic agencies, to pay close watch and to stand prepared, particularly with measures to help some of these workers. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, sir, let me first thank Mr. Patrick Day for his observations. His observations are right. If I may just elaborate on some of those observations. Indeed, any unilateral actions will have direct and indirect impact. And all this cumulatively will cause a lot of uncertainties to the market. There are uncertainties that are of immediate consequence because the trade flows, the trade patterns are disrupted. There are also indirect impact that affects the longer term investments, and this creates another round of uncertainties. Now, how should Singapore manage such situations? First and foremost, as an economy, we are an open economy. We must make sure that we are not overly dependent on any particular markets, which is why a couple of days ago I mentioned during the President's debate that we must continually expand and diversify our markets to make sure that we are not overly dependent on any particular markets for our products and investment. So that's the first order of business. I've also asked MTI staff and economists to do an in-depth studies on the possible implications of a long drawn-out trade war or an escalating trade war. This will require further study because there are at least a few levels of implications for us. A first level of implication is that if the tariff goes up on specific products, there's a direct impact on the cost to business, the cost to the factories, companies, and so forth. That is the easy part. But there's also an indirect impact, which is when the tariffs are, even though the tariffs are not targeted at Singapore, it will cause the global trade flows to shift. And because when the global trade flow shifts, it will have a knock-on impact on Singapore. Whether is it positive, negative, to what extent, we will need to study this carefully. There's yet a third impact. Because when the tariffs are targeted even at third-party countries, it affects the trade flows between and amongst these countries, which will then have yet another round of consequent effects on Singapore. So all these are complex issues. It requires us to watch the trends carefully, as you have mentioned. It requires us to review our economic models to make sure that we understand the shifts in the trade flows and ask ourselves what other actions do we need to undertake in order to safeguard ourselves from all these uncertainties. So these are the things that MTI will continue to watch carefully, not just in isolation, but also with the other government agencies and also with our other partners, trade partners including.